Our son-in-law splashed hot coffee straight into our daughter's face, right at the Thanksgiving table, snarling, "Sit quiet!" His mother cackled. "It's about time someone put her in her place." I calmly looked at my wife. She silently handed me the phone. I dialed an old military contact. The man who answered had no idea what devastating consequences would hit them in just 10 minutes.
Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now.
My name is Harold Coleman. Hal to my friends. Colonel Coleman to anyone who ever faced me in a military courtroom. I'm 67 years old, retired after 28 years as a JAG Corps attorney for the United States Army. I've prosecuted deserters, defended heroes, and learned one fundamental truth about human nature. Everyone reveals themselves eventually. You just have to watch closely enough. I live in Austin, Texas now, in a ranch-style house on Willow Creek Drive, with my wife Betty. We've been married 43 years, met her at a USO dance in Fort Hood back in 1981. She was a nursing student with auburn hair and the kind of smile that made sergeants forget their ranks. I asked her to dance, stepped on her feet twice, and somehow convinced her to marry me 6 months later. Best closing argument I ever made. Betty sees people, not just looks at them, sees them. 43 years and she still catches things I miss. She'll watch someone for 5 minutes and know their entire life story. That man's line about his back injury, she'll whisper at a party. Watch how he forgets to limp when he thinks no one's looking. She was right about that insurance adjuster. She was right about my commanding officer's wife. And she was right about Derek Price 3 years ago when our daughter Megan brought him home for the first time. "There's something wrong with that boy," Betty told me that night, standing in our kitchen after they'd left. "The way he watches her. Like she's something he owns, not someone he loves." I didn't see it then. Derek was charming, successful, a senior insurance agent at Lone Star Insurance Group, pulling in $95,000 a year. Good handshake, looked me in the eye, called me sir without sounding sarcastic. I thought Betty was being overprotective. I should have listened. Megan was our miracle baby. She grew up smart and creative, the kind of kid who'd rather draw than watch television. She became a graphic designer, worked at a good agency downtown, had friends who adored her. Then she married Derek. The changes came slowly. First, she quit her job. Derek thought freelancing would give her more flexibility. Then she stopped calling as often, stopped visiting. When she did come over, she was quieter, thinner. Betty noticed it first, of course. "Something's wrong with our girl," she'd say. "She's disappearing." Thanksgiving Day changed everything. We'd invited them for dinner, Megan, Derek, and his mother, Virginia. Betty had been cooking since dawn, turkey stuffing, her famous pecan pie. Virginia Price arrived first, sweeping into our home like she owned it. 63 years old, widow of 8 years, living off her dead husband's modest pension in Houston. She'd always looked at our home with hungry eyes. I'd caught her once, running her finger along our antique grandfather clock, the one I'd spent 6 months restoring, and asking Megan, "When your parents pass, who gets this?" Derek arrived with Megan 10 minutes later. He shook my hand too firmly, complimented Betty's cooking before he'd tasted it, and settled into my chair at the head of the table like it belonged to him. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Virginia dominated the conversation with complaints about her neighbors. Derek nodded along, occasionally glancing at his phone under the table. Then Megan spoke. Just a comment about a news story she'd read. Nothing controversial. Derek's head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" Megan's voice faltered. "I was just saying that—" "Nobody asked you." His words cut like a blade. "You don't know anything about politics. Just sit there and be quiet." Betty's hand found mine under the tablecloth. A warning, a question, a plea for patience. "Derek," I said carefully, "she's allowed to have an opinion." He ignored me, his eyes fixed on Megan with something cold and cruel. She was shrinking in her chair, becoming smaller, and I watched my daughter turn into someone I barely recognized. Then Derek picked up his coffee cup. It happened fast. One moment, the cup was in his hand. The next, hot coffee was streaming down Megan's face, dripping onto her blouse, and Derek was leaning toward her with his teeth bared. "I said, sit quiet," Megan gasped, from shock, from pain. Her skin flushed red where the coffee had hit. Not boiling, but hot enough to hurt. And Virginia Price, this woman who'd eaten at my table, drunk my wine. Virginia Price laughed, a high, cruel sound that bounced off the walls. "About time someone put her in her place," she said. "She's always been too mouthy." I have been angry before, but this was different. This was cold. The kind of anger that doesn't boil over. It freezes solid and waits. I looked at Betty. 43 years of marriage means you develop a language no one else speaks. Her eyes said, "Not here. Not now. We need to think." She reached into her pocket and handed me my phone. My fingers found the contact without looking. Colonel Marcus Rendell, retired, now running a family law firm on Brazos Street, specializing in domestic cases. The best legal mind I'd ever known. "Hal?" Marcus's voice came through, surprised but warm. "Been a while, old friend." "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Remember when you told me I could call you any time?" A pause. He understood immediately. "What do you need?" I looked at Derek, reaching for the turkey like nothing had happened. Virginia, still smirking. Megan, tears streaming silently down her coffee-stained face. "It's time," I said. "I need your help."
The moment that coffee hit my daughter's face, something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted. Like a gear clicking into place after years of grinding against the wrong tooth. I'm Betty Coleman, 64 years old, retired trauma nurse with 30 years in emergency rooms across 3 states and 7 military bases. I've held dying soldiers, comforted grieving mothers, and watched people at their absolute worst. I know what cruelty looks like when it thinks no one's watching. I know the signs of someone being slowly destroyed from the inside out. I'd seen those signs in Megan for 3 years, and I'd done nothing. That's the part that haunted me as I led my daughter to the bathroom, guided her trembling hands to the cold faucet, and gently pressed a wet cloth to her reddening skin. Not a serious burn. The coffee had cooled enough to only sting rather than scar. But some wounds don't show on the surface. "It's okay, Mom," Megan whispered, and my heart cracked at the automatic response. How many times had she said those words? How many injuries, physical, emotional, had she minimized? "It's not okay, sweetheart," I said softly. "None of this has been okay for a very long time." She started crying then. Not the dramatic sobs you see in movies, but something quieter, more exhausted, like she'd been holding back tears for so long that she'd forgotten how to let them out properly. I held her while she cried. This woman who had once been my little girl, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them special flowers. The one who'd stayed up late, helping me arrange roses in my garden, asking a million questions about why some bloomed faster than others. I thought about those summers, Megan with dirt on her knees, laughing at something Harold had said, so full of light. Where had that girl gone? I knew the answer. I'd watched her disappear piece by piece. 3 years ago, Megan brought Derek home, and I felt something wrong immediately. Not anything obvious, just a feeling. A cold spot in an otherwise warm room. I watched him during dinner that first night. Watched how his eyes tracked Megan's movements. Watched how he touched her arm, not lovingly but possessively. Watched how she looked to him before answering questions, as if seeking permission. "There's something wrong with that boy," I told Harold later. He didn't see it. Men often don't, not because they're less perceptive, but because they look for different things. 6 months after the wedding, Megan quit her job. "Derek thinks freelancing is better," she explained, but she couldn't meet my gaze. A year in, she stopped calling her friends. "We've just drifted apart," she said. But I heard the rehearsed quality. 2 years in, she started losing weight, apologizing for everything, making herself smaller until sometimes I felt I could see right through her. I'd spent 30 years helping strangers survive their worst moments, but I'd failed to save my own daughter. Not anymore. When we emerged from the bathroom, Derek and Virginia were gone. They'd left without a word. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just vanished like cowards. Megan stayed the night. She curled up in her old bedroom, surrounded by posters of bands she'd loved as a teenager, and fell asleep almost instantly, the deep sleep of someone who finally felt safe. Harold returned late from his meeting with Marcus. I heard his car and met him on the porch with 2 cups of tea. Our ritual, 43 years, never missed. Marcus will help, Harold said, settling into his chair. But he needs evidence, documentation, something concrete. What kind? Financial records, witness statements, proof of patterns. He paused. Betty, Derek's been moving money. Marcus has contacts who can investigate, but we need Megan's cooperation. I sipped my tea, watching steam curl into the night. In my garden, roses lay dormant for winter, but I knew they were alive beneath the cold soil, waiting for spring. We can't force her, I said carefully. That would make us no better than him. I know. She has to choose this herself. We can only give her the tools. Harold reached over and took my hand. His fingers were rough from restoring antique clocks, a hobby requiring patience and precision. He understood that some things couldn't be rushed. Then we give her the tools, he said, and we wait. Together. Always. We sat in comfortable silence, planning without speaking. This was our strength, thinking as one after 4 decades. Harold would handle the legal side, I would handle Megan. Together, we would build something Derek Price would never see coming. The next morning, Megan came down for breakfast. We ate pancakes, her favourite since childhood, and talked about nothing important. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and something in her face changed. That familiar flinch, that automatic fear. It's Derek, she said quietly. He's apologising. Says he loves me. Wants me to come home. My hand found Harold's beneath the table. What are you going to do, sweetheart? Megan stared at her phone. For one moment, I thought she might refuse. Might finally see the pattern. I should go back, she said, and my heart sank. He's my husband. He said he's sorry. She left an hour later. I hugged her at the door, holding on longer than usual. Remember, I whispered, our door is always open, always. I watched her drive away until her taillights disappeared. Harold's arms settled around my shoulders. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. We stood together on our porch, 2 people who had weathered decades and emerged stronger each time. This would be our greatest test. But we had something Derek Price didn't understand. We had each other. And we had patience. The battle for our daughter had begun.
A week passed. 7 days of watching Megan's number on my phone, waiting for the call I knew would come eventually. Betty handled the waiting better than I did. She always does. While I paced, she gardened, trimming her dormant rose bushes with the patience of a surgeon. Wearing a hole in the floor won't make her call faster, she told me one morning. I know, but sitting still feels like losing. She smiled that knowing smile. Sometimes the best strategy is letting the enemy think they've won. Betty was right, of course. She usually is. On the 7th day, I drove downtown to meet Marcus Rendell at his office on Brazos Street. The building was one of those glass towers that had sprung up in Austin's boom years, sleek, expensive, and filled with people who charged by the hour. Marcus's firm occupied the entire 4th floor. He met me in the lobby himself. Same Marcus I remembered from our JAG Corps days. A little grayer, a little heavier, but with the same sharp eyes that had made him one of the best prosecutors I'd ever worked with. Hal! He shook my hand firmly. Wish it was under better circumstances. So do I. His office was lined with law books and military memorabilia. Framed photos showed him shaking hands with generals and governors. But the real story was in the case files stacked on every surface, evidence of hundreds of families he'd helped to put back together. Tell me everything, he said. So I did. The coffee. Virginia's laugh. The way Megan had shrunk in her chair like she was trying to disappear. Marcus listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Harold, what you're describing isn't just bad behavior. It's a pattern of coercive control. In Texas, that can significantly impact divorce proceedings. How so? Texas is a community property state. Normally everything gets split 50-50. But if we can demonstrate fault, cruelty, financial misconduct, that sort of thing, the judge has discretion to award a disproportionate share to the aggrieved party. He paused. We need documentation, concrete evidence of the pattern. What kind of evidence? Financial records, for starters, bank statements, credit card bills, anything that shows how he's been controlling money. Witness statements from anyone who's observed his behavior. Medical records if Megan's seen a doctor for stress-related issues. He tapped his pen against the desk. And I'd recommend hiring a private investigator, someone who can dig into his finances properly. You have someone in mind? Marcus nodded. Carla Jenkins. Former police detective, left the force after she blew the whistle on some corrupt colleagues. She's thorough, discreet, and she's never lost a case for us. I wrote down the name. What about Megan? She went back to him. That's not unusual, Marcus said gently. It often takes several attempts before someone in her situation is ready to leave permanently. The best thing you can do is be there when she's ready. Don't push. Don't pressure. Just keep the door open. That evening, I sat with Betty on the porch and told her everything. She listened with that particular stillness she gets when she's thinking hard, not just hearing words, but processing every implication. So we need evidence, she said finally. Yes, and we need Megan to cooperate, eventually. Betty sipped her tea. I'll handle Megan. She needs to feel like this is her choice, not something we're forcing on her. And in the meantime, you call this Carla Jenkins. Let her start looking into Derek's finances. If he's the kind of man I think he is, he's hiding something. I looked at my wife, this woman I'd spent 43 years loving, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. She was the strategist in our partnership. I might know the law, but she knew people. What would I do without you? I asked. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Lucky for both of us, you'll never have to find out. I called Carla Jenkins the next morning. Her voice was brisk and professional. No small talk, just business. I explained the situation, and she asked a few pointed questions. I'll need access to any financial documents your daughter can provide, she said. Joint account statements, tax returns, anything that shows the money flow. She's back with her husband right now. Getting documents might be difficult. Understood. I'll start with public records and work from there. You'd be surprised what people leave lying around when they think no one's watching. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the evening. Betty and I were on the porch, our ritual, when Carla's number appeared. Mr. Coleman, she said, I've been looking into your son-in-law's financial records, the ones your daughter had legitimate access to through their joint accounts. And there's something you need to see. Over the past 2 years, approximately $47,000 has been transferred out of their joint account in irregular increments. The transfers all went to the same place. My grip tightened on the phone. Where? An account belonging to Virginia Price, his mother. I looked at Betty. She was watching me with those knowing eyes, reading my expression like a book. $47,000, I repeated slowly. That's correct. And Mr. Coleman? Your daughter had no idea. Her name isn't on any of the authorization forms. I thanked Carla and hung up. Betty didn't ask what had happened. She could see it on my face. What did she find? Derek's been funneling money to his mother. $47,000 over 2 years, behind Megan's back. Betty was silent for a long moment. Then she set down her teacup with a soft click. Well, she said quietly, now we have our evidence.
The news about the money changed everything. Not because it surprised me. I'd always known there was something rotten in Derek Price, but because it gave us something concrete, something real. Evidence. Harold handled the legal strategy with Marcus. I handled Megan. A few days after Carla's discovery, I called my daughter and asked her to lunch. There's a little cafe I found, I told her. Quiet, good food, away from downtown. The location was deliberate, far enough from Derek's office that we wouldn't accidentally run into him, private enough that Megan might feel safe talking. She arrived looking tired, thinner than she'd been even a week ago. The dark circles under her eyes told their own story, but she smiled when she saw me, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of my little girl underneath all that exhaustion. We ordered coffee and sandwiches. I didn't mention Derek, didn't mention Thanksgiving. Just talked about ordinary things, the weather, a book I'd been reading, how the roses were preparing for winter dormancy. Megan relaxed, slowly, piece by piece, like a flower opening after frost. Then, halfway through her sandwich, she said, "Mum, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "How did you know Dad was the right one? How did you know he wouldn't change?" I set down my coffee cup. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. "I didn't know," I admitted, "but I paid attention to how he treated me when he thought no one was watching, whether his actions matched his words." I paused. "Harold isn't perfect, nobody is. But he's consistent, reliable. What you see is what you get." Megan was quiet. "Derek was so different when we were dating, so charming, so attentive. And now," her eyes dropped, "now I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Everything I do is wrong. He controls the money, checks my phone, tells me what to wear." She stopped, surprised by her own words. "I sound crazy, don't I?" "No, sweetheart." I reached across and took her hand. "You sound like someone who's been slowly isolated from everyone who loves her. That's not crazy. That's what people like Derek do. They make you doubt yourself, so you won't notice what they're really doing." Megan's eyes filled with tears. "Mum, I don't know how I got here. I used to be strong, I had friends, a career. Now I can't even buy groceries without permission. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault. But I married him. I chose this. You chose a man who showed you a mask. The person behind the mask isn't who you married. Sweetheart, you can still choose differently. You can choose yourself." She wiped her eyes. "I don't even know where I'd start." "You don't have to know right now. Just know that your father and I are here. Whatever you need, whenever you're ready." We finished lunch. I drove home replaying the conversation. Megan hadn't committed to anything, but she'd opened up, maybe for the first time in 3 years. That evening, Harold and I sat on the porch, our ritual. "How was lunch?" and he asked. "Progress. She's starting to see the pattern, but she's not ready to act yet." "What do? We wait, we prepare, and we let her come to us when she's ready." Harold nodded. He understood patience. All those years restoring antique clocks had taught him that some things couldn't be forced. You had to work with the mechanism, not against it. "Carla's still digging," he said. "She mentioned something about irregularities at Derek's job, insurance claims that don't quite add up." I thought about Derek at our Thanksgiving table. So confident, so certain he was the smartest person in the room. Men like that always made mistakes. They were so convinced of their own superiority that they never noticed when the walls were closing in. It was nearly 9 when my phone rang. Megan's number. "Mum?" Her voice trembled. "Derek said he wants to sell my car, the Honda you gave me for my birthday. He says it's too expensive to maintain." A pause. "But that's my car, isn't it? He can't just sell it." Harold was watching me. I put the phone on speaker. "Megan, honey, that car is in your name. It was a gift. He has no legal right to sell it." "Are you sure?" He made it sound like, "I'm sure. Your father can explain the legalities." Harold leaned toward the phone. "That car is yours, sweetheart. Texas law is clear about gifts between spouses. It's your separate property." Silence. Then, "Why would he lie about that?" I exchanged a look with Harold. This was the moment, the crack in the foundation. "Because he wanted you to think you had no power," I said gently. "He's been lying about a lot of things, Megan." "What do you mean?" "Come home tomorrow. We'll explain everything." After she hung up, Harold and I processed what had happened. Derek had overplayed his hand. In trying to take Megan's car, he'd given her a reason to question everything else. "He's getting desperate," Harold said. "Or greedy. Maybe both." I looked at my husband, this man I'd loved for 43 years. We were so different. He saw the world in terms of laws and logic. I saw it in hearts and hurts. But together, we were complete. "She's coming home tomorrow," I said. Then we'd better be ready. We finished our tea as the stars came out. Somewhere across the city, Derek Price was probably congratulating himself on another successful manipulation. He had no idea that his world was about to change, and we smiled.
The next morning, Megan arrived at our house looking like she hadn't slept. Dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. But there was something different, too, a set to her jaw that reminded me of the determined little girl who'd once insisted on learning to ride a bike even after falling 6 times. Betty sat beside her on the couch. I took the armchair across from them, leaning forward. "Tell us everything," I said, and she did. For the next 2 hours, Megan talked about the rules Derek had established from the first month of marriage, about the checking of her phone, her email, her purchases, about the monthly allowance of $200 for a grown woman with a career, about the comments that seemed small at first but built into a wall of criticism so high she could barely see over it. "He told me I was too stupid to handle money," she said quietly, "that I was lucky he took care of everything, and after a while, I believed him." Betty squeezed her hand. I felt that cold anger stir again, the same feeling from Thanksgiving, but more focused now, more purposeful. "There's something else you need to know," I said, "about the money." I explained what Carla Jenkins had found, the $47,000 transferred to Virginia's account, the regular payments disguised as family support, the fact that Megan's signature wasn't on a single authorization form. Her face went through several emotions, confusion, disbelief, then a slow-burning anger that matched my own. "He's been stealing from us," she said, "from our future, and giving it to her." "Yes? How long?" 2 years, maybe longer." Megan was silent for a long moment. Then she looked up at both of us. "What do we do?" That afternoon, I drove downtown to Marcus's office. We had work to do. The document protecting Megan's car, the Honda Accord we'd given her for her 30th birthday, was straightforward. Texas law is clear about gifts between spouses. They remain separate property. But Derek had been telling Megan it was their car, that he had the right to sell it. Another lie in a marriage built on lies. Marcus drafted an affidavit affirming the gift's status. Clean, legal, irrefutable. "Have her sign it," he said, sliding the papers across his desk, "and make sure Derek knows it exists. Sometimes the best defense is letting the other side know you have teeth." I drove to Megan's apartment that afternoon. It was the first time I'd been there in nearly 2 years. Derek always found reasons to meet elsewhere, and I'd never pushed. Another mistake I was determined to correct. The building was nice enough from the outside. Congress Avenue address. Decent neighborhood. But when Megan opened the door, I stepped into a space that felt more like a cell than a home. Small. Dark. The blinds were drawn despite the afternoon sun. The furniture was sparse and impersonal. Nothing that suggested the creative, vibrant woman who'd once covered her childhood bedroom with artwork. And on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a dollar sign, was a handwritten list. I walked closer, pretending to look for a glass of water. The list was in Derek's handwriting. Daily requirements, clean. By 5 p.m. dinner. Ready by 6:30. p.m. no calls to parents without permission. Check in by text every 2 hours when out. Weekly budget review. Sunday 8 p.m. I felt my hands clench. Betty had been right 3 years ago. There was something wrong with that boy. Something broken and cruel that enjoyed breaking others. Megan saw me reading it. "He says it helps me stay organized," she said softly, "that I need structure." I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. When I did, my voice was carefully controlled. "Let's sign those papers." She signed. I witnessed. The car was legally, irrefutably hers. "Keep this somewhere he can't find it," I said, handing her a copy. "And Megan, you don't need his permission for anything. You never did." I was heading for the door when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, confident footsteps I recognized from Thanksgiving dinner. The door opened before I reached it. Derek stood in the entrance, keys in hand, staring at me with undisguised suspicion. He was wearing his work clothes, expensive suit, gold watch, the uniform of a man who wanted everyone to know he was successful. "Harold." He didn't bother with pleasantries. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. The same smile I used to give opposing counsel when I knew I had them cornered. "Visiting my daughter. That's not illegal, is it, Derek?" His eyes flicked to the papers in my hand, then to Megan, then back to me. I could see his mind working, trying to figure out what he'd missed, what was happening without his control. "We're having dinner soon," he said, "so if you don't mind." "Of course." I patted his shoulder as I passed, feeling him tense under my hand. "Family's important, isn't it? You should always make time for family." I was in the elevator before he could respond. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of his face. For the first time since I'd met him, Derek Price looked afraid.
The holidays passed like a held breath. Derek insisted that he and Megan spend Christmas with his mother in Houston. He didn't ask. He announced it. She had no say in the matter. I called every day. Sometimes Derek answered, his voice dripping with false politeness. "She's resting, Betty. I'll have her call you back." She never did. Harold and I spent Christmas Eve decorating a tree that felt too quiet. We'd planned to give Megan her gifts when she came home. Instead, the packages sat under the branches, waiting. We saw in the new year on our porch, drinking champagne and watching fireworks. Not celebrating, more like marking time. Then a few days into the new year, I heard a car in the driveway. I knew before I reached the window. I opened the front door just as Megan was getting out of her Honda. She looked terrible, pale, thinner than 2 weeks ago. When she hugged me, I felt how fragile she'd become, like something made of glass and paper. "I told him I needed to check on you," she said, "that you'd been feeling sick." I held her at arm's length, and that's when I saw it. Her sleeve had ridden up during our hug. On her wrist, just above the bone, was a bruise, purple and yellow, about the size of a man's grip. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I fell." The lie came automatically. "Let me see." She let me push up her sleeve. The bruise was worse than I'd thought. Clear finger marks where someone had grabbed her, hard. "I'm going to take a picture," I said, "for the family album." Megan didn't argue. Some part of her knew why I really wanted it. We went inside. Harold emerged from his workshop, took one look at Megan's face, and made tea without being asked. I photographed the bruise, multiple angles, clear lighting. Then I added it to a folder labelled Garden Plans 2025 that contained nothing about gardens at all. We sat while Megan talked. About the holidays at Virginia's house, the snide comments, Derek's mother treating her like a servant. About Derek's increasing paranoia since Thanksgiving. He was convinced we were plotting something. "He grabbed my wrist because I was texting you," Megan said quietly. "He wanted to see what I'd written." Harold's jaw tightened. I kept my anger controlled. Anger wouldn't help Megan now. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "I think it's time you met with Marcus Rendell." "The lawyer?" "The best family law attorney in Texas, and an old friend of your father's." Megan hesitated. I could see the fear warring with something else, something that looked almost like hope. "Derek would find out." "Not if we're careful. I'll tell him I'm taking you to a doctor's appointment," which isn't entirely untrue. I touched the bruise on her wrist gently. This needs to be documented properly too. 2 days later, I drove Megan to the medical centre on the north side of town. We did see a doctor. She documented the bruise officially, noted the pattern of finger marks, asked careful questions that Megan finally answered honestly. Then we drove to Brazos Street. Marcus Rendell's office was everything Derek's flashy persona wasn't. Understated, professional, filled with books and quiet competence. He listened to Megan's story without interrupting, taking notes in a legal pad, asking occasional questions. When she finished, he set down his pen. "Mrs. Price, Megan, what you're describing is a pattern of coercive control. It's recognized in Texas courts as a form of domestic abuse. Combined with the financial misconduct Harold has documented, you have grounds for a divorce that's very much in your favor." "What about the money? The $47,000? That's community property that was transferred without your knowledge or consent. The court can order its return." He paused. "And there may be more. We're still investigating your husband's professional activities." "What do you mean?" Marcus glanced at me. I nodded slightly. There's evidence that Derek may have committed insurance fraud. A client named Ramirez received $23,000 less than he was entitled to. We believe Derek kept the difference. Megan sat very still. I watched her face as the full picture came into focus. Not just a controlling husband, but a criminal one. If that's true, she said slowly, he could lose his job. More than that, he could face criminal charges. Silence. Then Megan straightened in her chair. I watched the transformation happen in real time, the hunched shoulders pulling back, the chin lifting, the eyes hardening into something that looked almost like her old self. What do I need to do? After the meeting, we drove back to our house. Harold was waiting on the porch with tea. Our ritual. Megan walked up the steps and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in 3 years. Fire. Determination. The ghost of the strong woman she used to be, finally fighting her way back to the surface. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice steady for the first time in months. "I want to know everything about those $47,000, and I want to know how I take my life back." Harold and I exchanged a look. No words needed. Our daughter was ready to fight.
The next 2 weeks were the most satisfying of my retirement. Watching Megan transform was like watching a flower finally getting sunlight after years in shadow. The hunched shoulders straightened, the apologetic tone disappeared, and most importantly, the fear in her eyes slowly turned to determination. We worked as a team, the 3 of us, plus Betty behind the scenes providing emotional support while I handled the tactical side. First, we opened a personal bank account for Megan. I accompanied her to the Bank of America branch on Guadalupe Street, playing the role of the concerned father, helping my daughter with some financial paperwork. The teller didn't ask questions. Within an hour, Megan had her own account, one Derek knew nothing about. "Start transferring your freelance payments here," I told her as we left. "Small amounts, 500, maybe 700 at a time. Nothing that will trigger alerts on the joint account." "Won't he notice?" "Not if you're careful. Tell him business has been slow. He already thinks you're incompetent with money. Use his arrogance against him." She smiled at that, a small, fierce smile I hadn't seen in years. Over the following days, Megan began quietly building her escape fund. Meanwhile, Carla Jenkins delivered her final report. We met at a coffee shop near campus, neutral territory. Carla slid a manila folder across the table, her face professionally blank. "Everything's in there," she said. "The $47,000 transferred to Virginia Price. Bank records, dates, amounts, and," she paused, "the other matter." I opened the folder. Inside were copies of insurance documents, internal emails, payment records. A year ago, Derek processed a claim for a man named Antonio Ramirez. House fire. The actual payout should have been $68,000. Carla tapped the relevant page. Ramirez received $45,000. The remaining $23,000 was split between Derek and his supervisor. Insurance fraud. Textbook case. And Mr. Ramirez is very interested in pursuing it. He never understood why his claim was reduced so dramatically. I closed the folder. This was better than I'd hoped. Derek hadn't just been cruel to my daughter, he'd been a criminal to his clients. And criminals, in my experience, always think they're smarter than they are. "Thank you, Carla. Your work has been exceptional." "Just doing my job, Colonel." That evening I shared the information with Betty and Megan. We sat in our living room, papers spread across the coffee table, and for the first time, Megan saw the full scope of who she'd married. "He stole from a man whose house burned down," she said quietly, "while lecturing me about our budget. Yes. And he's been giving money to his mother, our money, while making me beg for $200 a month. Yes." Megan was silent for a long moment. When she looked up, there were no tears, just cold, clear resolve. "What's the plan?" Marcus and I had been preparing divorce documents for days. Everything was ready. The financial evidence, the documentation of coercive control, the medical records of the bruise on her wrist. We just needed Megan's signature. "We file first," I explained. "In Texas, the spouse who files first has certain procedural advantages. Derek thinks he's going to surprise you with divorce papers and leave you with nothing. We beat him to it. When? The moment we're ready. Marcus is preparing the final documents now. Everything was falling into place. The trap was set. Then Derek found the message. Megan had been careful, deleting texts, clearing her call history, but she'd missed one. A voicemail notification from Marcus's office, confirming an appointment time. My phone rang at 8 in the evening, Derek's number. "I know what you're doing, old man." His voice was tight with rage. "I found the message from that lawyer. Rendell and Associates. Very prestigious." I said nothing. Let him talk. "You think you can take me down? I've got a lawyer too. Better than yours. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and I'm going to make sure Megan gets nothing. She's been planning behind my back, and the court will see her for what she is. A manipulative, ungrateful. Derek." My voice was calm, conversational. "Have you spoken to your mother lately?" A pause. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Just curious. Family's important after all. You should check in with her. Ask about her savings account." Silence on the line. I could almost hear him thinking, trying to figure out what I knew. "You don't scare me, Harold. You're just a retired old man playing soldier. I'm going to bury your daughter in court. File your papers, Derek. We'll see who gets buried." He hung up. I set down the phone and turned to Betty, who had been listening from the doorway. "He thinks he's one step ahead," I said. She smiled. That steel beneath silk smile I'd fallen in love with 43 years ago. "He doesn't know we're 3 steps ahead." I nodded. "Time to make a call to Marcus. We file tomorrow, before he does."
The next few days were a blur of motion and counter-moves. Derek did exactly what he'd threatened, hired a lawyer, and began preparing his own divorce filing. We learned through Carla that he'd retained a young attorney named Bradley Chen, fresh out of law school and eager to prove himself, ambitious but inexperienced, perfect for a client who wanted someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. But we were faster. The morning after Derek's threatening phone call, Megan walked into Marcus Rendell's office and signed her divorce petition. I went with her, holding her hand as she put pen to paper. Harold stayed home. We'd agreed it was better if Derek didn't know how involved he was. Not yet. The documents were comprehensive. 3 years of financial records showing Derek's control over every penny. The $47,000 transferred to Virginia without Megan's knowledge. Medical documentation of the bruise on her wrist. Witness statements from neighbours who'd heard Derek's raised voice through apartment walls. And a detailed timeline of coercive control. The isolation, the criticism, the rules posted on their refrigerator. "This is solid," Marcus said, reviewing the final pages. "One of the strongest cases I've seen." Megan's hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. "What happens now?" "We file today. Derek will be served within 48 hours. And then," Marcus smiled grimly, "then we wait for his response." We didn't have to wait long. Derek's counterattack came from an unexpected direction. Virginia. 2 days after the papers were served, my phone started ringing. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Old friends from church. Even Betty's cousin Martha from San Antonio. The message was always the same, delivered with concern that barely masked the gossip hunger beneath. "I heard the most terrible thing about your family." "Is it true that you're forcing poor Megan to divorce her husband? Virginia Price told me everything. How you've been manipulating her, turning her against Derek." Harold wanted to fight back. I saw it in the tension of his jaw, the way his hands clenched when I told him about the calls. But I knew better. "Let her talk," I said that evening on our porch. "The truth will come out in court. Everything Virginia says now will just make her look worse later. It's hard to sit here and do nothing while she spreads lies. We're not doing nothing. We're being strategic." I reached over and took his hand. "This is what people like them do when they're scared. They attack, they manipulate, they try to control the narrative. But we have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth and documentation." Harold squeezed my hand. "When did you get so wise?" "About the same time I married you." Meanwhile, Megan was fighting her own battle. She was still technically living at the apartment, appearing there during the day, leaving before Derek got home from work, staying with us at night. It was a delicate dance, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while preparing for the war ahead. Derek tried everything: flowers, apologies, tearful phone calls claiming he'd changed. When those didn't work, he switched to threats, vague comments about what would happen if she betrayed him, reminders of how difficult he could make things. Megan documented all of it. Every text, every voicemail, every encounter. The folder of evidence grew thicker by the day. Then came Valentine's Day. Megan arrived at our house that evening carrying a bouquet of red roses, expensive ones, the kind Derek would have complained about if she'd bought them for herself. He had them delivered to the apartment, she said, setting them on the kitchen counter. There was a card attached. She handed it to me. Forgive me for everything. Let's start over. I love you. Dee, I watched my daughter stare at those flowers. For one terrible moment, I saw doubt flicker across her face. 3 years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Part of her still wanted to believe the lie. Mum, what if he really has changed? I took her hands in mine, held them firmly. Sweetheart, do you remember what you told me about the rules on your refrigerator? About the allowance? About asking permission to call your own parents? She nodded slowly. Did he apologize for any of that when he sent these flowers? Silence. Did he offer to change anything specific? To go to counselling? To give you access to your own money? No. Then what exactly has changed? Megan looked at the roses for a long moment. Then she picked them up, walked to the kitchen trash and dropped them in. Nothing, she said quietly. Nothing has changed at all. Carla called that night with news. Through her contacts, she'd learned that Derek planned to file his divorce papers in 3 days. He wanted to beat us to the courthouse, establish himself as the wronged party. He didn't know we'd already filed. Harold and I sat on our porch after Megan went to bed, processing everything. 3 days, I said. He'll walk into that courthouse thinking he's won, and discover we were there first. Harold's smile was cold. I almost feel sorry for him. Almost? Almost. He took my hand. How are you holding up? I thought about it, honestly. The phone calls from Virginia's network, the whispers, the worry for Megan. I'm tired, I admitted, but I'm not giving up, not until this is finished. Together? Always. We finished our tea in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Somewhere across the city, Derek Price was probably celebrating his upcoming victory, planning what he'd say in court, counting money he thought he'd keep. He had no idea what was coming.
The day we'd been working toward arrived on a cold morning in late winter. I woke before dawn, too wired to sleep. Betty was already up, making coffee in the kitchen. We didn't need to talk, after 43 years. Some mornings speak for themselves. Today's the day, she said, handing me a cup. Today's the day. Marcus had the filing ready. Megan's divorce petition, comprehensive and devastating, sat in a folder on his desk. Attached were bank records showing $47,000 transferred to Virginia Price without Megan's knowledge, medical documentation of the bruise on her wrist, witness statements, the timeline of coercive control, and a request for the court to consider fault in dividing the marital assets. We filed that morning, one day before Derek planned to file his own papers. Timing, as I'd learned in the military, is everything. The clerk at Travis County Courthouse stamped our documents at 9:47 a.m. By 10:15, Derek Price was officially being sued for divorce by his wife. He just didn't know it yet. That same morning, something else happened. Antonio Ramirez, the client whose insurance claim Derek had shorted by $23,000, walked into the offices of Lone Star Insurance Group and asked to speak with Human Resources. I hadn't told him to do it. I hadn't even spoken to him directly. But Carla Jenkins had provided him with copies of the documents, proving what Derek had done, and Mr. Ramirez had decided on his own that someone should know the truth. Funny how justice works sometimes. You don't always have to push. Sometimes you just have to shine a light, and people do the right thing. The next day, Derek walked into the courthouse with his young lawyer, ready to file his divorce petition, ready to paint himself as the victim of a manipulative wife and her interfering parents. He approached the clerk's window with confidence. I know because Marcus had a contact there who described the scene to him later. "I'm here to file for divorce," Derek announced. "Derek Price versus Megan Price." The clerk checked her records, frowned, checked again. "I'm sorry, sir. There's already an active case with those parties." "What? That's impossible." "Price versus Price. Filed yesterday morning. Your wife is the petitioner." According to Marcus's contact, Derek's face went through several colors in rapid succession. Red, white, then a mottled purple that suggested his blood pressure was doing interesting things. There must be a mistake. "No mistakes. Would you like information on how to respond to the petition?" He left without another word. 3 days later, the second blow landed. Derek received an official notice from Lone Star Insurance's HR department requesting his presence for a meeting regarding irregularities in client accounts. He called me that evening. I was in my workshop, carefully cleaning the gears of a 19th century pocket watch, when my phone rang. "What did you do?" His voice was shaking, with rage, with fear, with the dawning realization that his world was collapsing. "The company is investigating me. They're talking about fraud charges. This is you, isn't it? You and that lawyer friend of yours?" I set down my tools, gave him my full attention. "Derek, I didn't file any complaint against you. Mr. Ramirez did that himself." "Who?" "Antonio Ramirez, the client whose house burned down, the one you shorted $23,000 on his claim." I paused. "He figured out what you did. People usually do eventually." Silence on the line. I could almost hear him calculating, trying to find a way out. "You can't prove anything." "I don't have to prove anything. The insurance company's investigators will do that, and the divorce court will handle the $47,000 you funneled to your mother." I let that sink in. "Did you really think no one would notice, Derek? That you could steal from your wife, defraud your clients, and face no consequences? You're destroying my life." "No, you destroyed your own life. You destroyed it when you threw coffee in my daughter's face and told her to be quiet. You destroyed it every time you controlled her money, checked her phone, isolated her from everyone who loved her." My voice was calm, cold, the voice I'd used in courtrooms for 28 years. "We didn't destroy anything. We just held up a mirror." He hung up without responding. I went back to my pocket watch. Some things take time and patience to repair. Some things are too broken to fix. A week later, Derek was terminated from Lone Star Insurance Group for violations of company policy and client trust. No severance, no reference, just a cardboard box of personal items and a security escort to the parking lot. Betty and I heard the news from Carla, who'd maintained her contacts throughout the process. We were on our porch, our ritual, when she called. "It's done," I told Betty after hanging up. "He's out." She reached over and took my hand. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. The anger I'd carried since Thanksgiving had faded, replaced by something quieter. Not satisfaction exactly, more like completion, a gear finally clicking into place. "Like we're almost finished," I said. "One more step. The court date. The court date." I squeezed her hand. "And then our daughter gets her life back."
The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood-panelled walls, fluorescent lights, an American flag in the corner. The kind of room where lives change direction in an hour. I sat in the gallery with Harold, our hands intertwined. Megan was at the front table with Marcus, her back straight, her face composed. She looked like herself again, the strong, capable woman she'd always been underneath. Derek sat at the opposite table with his young attorney. He looked terrible, gaunt, unshaven, wearing a suit that no longer fit quite right. 3 months of consequences had aged him a decade. Gone was the confident man who'd thrown coffee in my daughter's face. In his place sat someone diminished. Behind him sat Virginia Price, wearing her best church outfit, floral dress, costume jewelry, but her face was tight with anxiety, and she kept glancing at the documents on the judge's bench. Judge Eleanor Carter. Sharp eyes, no tolerance for nonsense, reviewed the case with methodical precision. She'd clearly read everything: the financial records, the transfers to Virginia, the medical documentation of the bruise. "Mr. Price," she said, looking at Derek over her reading glasses, "the evidence shows $47,000 transferred to your mother without your wife's knowledge. Can you explain?" Derek's lawyer whispered something. Derek shook his head. "They were family loans. My mother needed help." "Family loans your wife knew nothing about? From a joint account?" "She wasn't good with finances. I was protecting her." "By secretly giving her money to your mother?" The judge's tone made clear what she thought of that explanation. Point by point, Marcus laid out the case: the coercive control, the financial abuse, the isolation. I watched Derek's face as each piece of evidence landed. First denial, then anger, then slowly, fear. Virginia's expression shifted too. When the judge mentioned the $47,000 would be returned as marital property, her face went pale. That was her money, her nest egg, and now it was going back to the woman she'd laughed at on Thanksgiving. The ruling was comprehensive. Megan received the apartment. Derek would pay her share over 24 months, totaling $28,000. She kept her car, which had always been her separate property. The $47,000 was ordered returned in full. Additionally, Judge Carter said, given the documented pattern of financial misconduct and coercive control, I'm awarding Mrs. Price 60% of remaining marital assets rather than the standard 50-50 split. Derek's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. It was over. In the hallway afterward, Megan was trembling slightly, but her eyes were bright. "I can't believe it," she said. "It's really over." "It's really over," Harold confirmed. That's when Derek approached. He looked like a man who'd lost everything, which he had. His job, his money, his marriage, the control he'd valued more than love. "You ruined my life," he said to Harold, his voice hoarse. Harold regarded him calmly, the same look I'd seen him give defendants in military courtrooms. "You thought you were a predator at our table," Harold said quietly, "but you forgot that I spent 30 years hunting people like you. Only they wore uniforms." He paused. "You ruined your own life, Derek. Every decision was yours. We just held up a mirror." Derek had no response. He walked away, Virginia hurrying after him. She shot me one last, venomous look, but there was defeat in it too. Her scheme had failed. Her money was gone. I felt Harold's arms settle around my shoulders. "It's done," I said. "It's done." A month later, spring arrived in Austin. My roses began to bloom. First the early varieties, then the prize-winning hybrids I'd cultivated for decades. Megan was in the garden with me, helping prune the new growth. She'd moved back temporarily while rebuilding her life. She was freelancing again, reconnecting with old friends, slowly remembering who she'd been before Derek. "Mum," she said, pausing with her pruning shears, "how did you know? That day at Thanksgiving when you handed Dad the phone?" I thought about it. The question deserved an honest answer. "I didn't know exactly," I admitted, "but I knew we couldn't do nothing. And I knew your father and I work best as a team. We've been figuring things out together for 43 years. This was just one more problem to solve. Thank you for not giving up on me." "Oh, sweetheart." I set down my tools and took her hands. "We would never give up on you. That's what family means." Harold appeared on the porch with 3 cups of tea. Our ritual, expanded now to include our daughter. We settled into our chairs, the same chairs where Harold and I had planned and strategized through the long winter months. The sun was warm, the roses were blooming, and my daughter was smiling, really smiling for the first time in 3 years. "Thank you," Megan said softly, "for everything." Harold reached over and squeezed her hand. I did the same. "We're family," I said simply. "Family protects its own." We sat together in comfortable silence. The battle was over. The wounds would heal, and our daughter was finally free. Some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth waiting for. And some things, like love, like family, like 43 years of partnership, are worth everything.
If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.